Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker of Elkins Consulting. Many of my clients reach out to me because they're in transition. Their children are hitting milestone ages. They want more from their work. They're hitting a big number birthday. And they want to develop clarity about their natural strengths, what their next adventure might look like. In this series, you'll hear me ask my guests questions to dig deeply into the stories that shaped their lives, stories that uncover patterns and may unveil insights into dissatisfaction, and also where their strengths lie and where they've found and continue to find joy. This podcast's intention is to have listeners think of their own related stories and how they tell them, discovering the internal messages that are limiting their success, and discovering how to shift their stories so they become positive life lessons to move them forward. If you're curious about what it would be like to work with me, visit elkinsconsulting.com and schedule a one-time 90-minute StrengthsFinder session.
I will never understand why people are so resistant to the power that is the platform of LinkedIn. I get that people are uncomfortable with social media generally sometimes, and I get that you can end up with a feed full of motivational memes, which kind of make my stomach ache a little, vomit a little in my mouth, or you can end up with a whole bunch of salespeople, and it can be really obnoxious. But what people don't understand is that when you choose who you see in your feed by the interesting content that you find and by connecting with one person who connects you with 14 other people, that this platform can be an amazing tool for connection. And that is how I met today's guest, Janine Hamner Holman, who reached out to me on LinkedIn after she saw something I posted about no longer virtual. And we found out that we had a few mutual connections. And she reached out and said, let's talk. And we had a phone call. And I have a feeling that in 5 years or so, we'll be looking back at that and say, and the rest is history. But for right now, it's only been a few months. So we're just going to have to go with it from now. But Janine, thank you so much for joining me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Oh, you're welcome, Sarah. I am so thrilled to be here with you. And so happy that I got brave and reached out that day on LinkedIn.
Yes, me too. And isn't it funny that we know that it takes some effort, it takes that courage of reaching out to somebody you don't know and saying something personal, like, I saw you post about this, and that matters to me. Mm-hmm. And it is brave. And thank you for saying that.
Oh, you're welcome. I was just on LinkedIn. In my feed, there was something from a man in probably, I would guess, his mid-40s, posted a picture of himself looking incredibly sad. And he was talking about his mental health journey over the last several months and how things have been hard and how reticent he's been to post that and how much we have a story in our heads about who men are supposed to be, and men are supposed to be strong and they're supposed to man up, and how worried he had been about posting this. And there were like 6,000 comments that people had posted, all of support and encouragement. And so one of the things that I contributed with him was, we have this ridiculous idea that vulnerability is weak. And the reality is, it is exactly the opposite. Vulnerability is strong. You can't be vulnerable and be weak. It takes courage. It takes getting outside of ourselves in our comfort zone and doing something that feels a little uncomfortable. Just like when I first reached out to you, and look at what's happened.
I agree. And the other thing that I've noticed is that for some reason, people think that resilience means without help. And I have told this story so many times about when I was hiking with my family and the boys were 4 and 6. And we had camped out that night. And the next day we were taking this long hike. And about 2 miles from the trailhead, my husband fell and broke his leg.
Oh my goodness.
And I had to get my family off a mountain. And you know what I did that was so hard? The hardest thing about getting my family off a mountain was enlisting help. Not because it wasn't there, but because I had to ask for it.
Right.
And that was my biggest aha moment, that is power in itself, is understanding that resilience doesn't mean without help.
Right.
No.
And we all have nonsense in our heads. And one of the nonsensical things that our culture has put in our head is this idea. And I think Americans are particularly susceptible to it because we have this myth in America of pulling myself up by my own bootstraps, which is really a ridiculous idea. Anything that we're up to that's a big thing, we need other people in it. Mm-hmm. Human beings we are pack animals. We are herd animals. We need other people to be at our best and to challenge us and to encourage us and to help us. And I used to have a big Post-it note on my computer that I would look at all the time that said, the smartest people ask for, because I had it that A, people don't ask for help, and B, if you need to ask for help, then you're something less than smart and maybe even stupid. Mm-hmm. And I can't be with the idea that I might be stupid. So, and one of my many coaches and mentors said to me at one point, like, okay, you're not stupid, but you're being an idiot.
Those are two very different things. There's an important distinction,
right? You're not bad. You may have done a bad thing. You're not stupid, but you're being idiotic. The smartest people ask for help. The smartest people enlist other people, enroll other people in what they're up to, and create a club or a group or
community,
whatever it is,
right?
A community that is up to something with them.
I love that you just said that. And there are two things that popped into my head as we started this. And one is, that's why I love what I do in terms of using StrengthsFinder to help build teams. Yeah. Because one of the biggest mistakes we make is thinking we have to be good at everything. And the damage that does not only to our own psyche and confidence, but the damage that does in terms of not being able to recognize others, acknowledge them for the beauty that they bring that's different from our own.
Right.
And I can tell you, the moment I hired somebody to do my bookkeeping, my income went up more than enough to cover that cost.
Right.
And that alone should be a lesson for every single human. That the moment you hire somebody to do something they're really good at, that you, A, aren't good at, or B, have no interest in doing, right. You're scratching them behind the ears. You're like, you're good at this, and I appreciate it, and I value it, because I'm not. But the moment you want coaching on storytelling, public speaking, StrengthsFinder, you reach out to me and I will serve that purpose. That's my role. So that's the first thing that popped into my head. And it took me into my 40s to get there, which is kind of sad. But that's part of what makes me a good coach, is I'm still doing it, still seeking that. The other thing that popped into my head when you said we're so devoted to this idea, this myth of pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps, is that no one has ever done that by themselves.
Right.
Because every person has either gone to school, whether that's public school, which is paid for by taxes, or they have driven on our roads that are paid for through our public taxes, or served in the military that is paid for through our public taxes. I mean, all the public infrastructure that we have, that we use, means that we have been dependent on others. And even the people who challenged us in the most negative ways, traumatized us in some ways, helped us grow into the being we are, for better or for worse. You did not do it alone. Right. I promise you. Even if it was out of spite, your success is out of spite for somebody treating you badly. You didn't do it on your own. You had some motivation to spite the crap out of this person. So anyway, those are the two things that popped in my head. I want to back up, though, because we never got to the first question that I love to ask my guests. And I want to get to it because I know it's going to be an insightful one with you.
Great.
Because I've met you once before. We recorded one of your podcasts with me as a guest.
That's right.
So I would love to hear from you something about yourself that most people might not know, something that isn't on your LinkedIn profile or your bio. And I know there's something in your past that is going to surprise people or at least catch us a little off guard.
So something that most people don't know about me is that I am an avid scuba diver. And I am a total water baby. The ocean is my happy place. And I had created a story that I was gonna get certified, like at some point in the future, when I had the time and when I had the money and when I was going to be going someplace where you could scuba dive. Well, the reality is we never have the time and we never have the money. We make priority decisions about how we use our time and how we use our money. And I live in Southern California. I live in Pasadena, and 22 miles away is the ocean. And 22 miles from that is the island of Catalina, which is surrounded by the world's largest kelp forest. And so I realized that on my 40th birthday, that I was going to make a choice to spend time and spend money and learn how to scuba dive. And I did. And the thing that got me immediately hooked about it was I thought it was going to be easy, and it was hard. The first time I went underneath the water and I'm supposed to be breathing, and it's huge, this vast ocean, I had a little bit of a panic attack. And it's like, oh, don't leave me. I kept saying in my head to my instructor, who was right there with me, like, ooh, stay here with, I'm not sure I got this. And then as I kept getting better at it, it kept getting more and more scientific, because there's a lot about being under the ocean and how our bodies work under pressure and how air works under pressure that you have to learn. And my experience in high school and college had always been science and math, not my jam. Like, you want to ask me about, I was an English and political science double major. Like, that is what I love. And so, like, having to learn about biology and physics and chemistry, like, it was constantly challenging. And I realized as an adult, we don't always put ourselves in situations where we get to learn something new and challenging, where, like, you're at risk. There's some stakes here. Like, if I mess this up, there could actually be significant consequences. So, and then I continued to fall in love with it, such that I jumped from the recreational track to the professional track, so that I can't certify you to scuba dive, but I can help somebody else certify you to scuba dive. I mean, it's a huge passion. And part of what I love about it is, under the ocean, the only thing that you hear is your own breathing. It is quiet and calm and peaceful. And then when you're back up above the ocean, talking with the other folks who are doing it, it's this immersive experience. And so most of what
Literally.
you guys, yeah, literally. And most of what you're talking about is being in the ocean and what you saw. And there's a lot in the community of telling stories, really to keep the community safe. And so people tell stories about when things didn't go so great, because it is a recreational sport in which people can and do die. And so it's important to keep the community safe. And so for however long you're doing it, whether it's a day or a week or a weekend, there's sort of nothing else in your head. You're not worrying about that fight that you had, or that thing that you said, or that deadline that you've got coming up when you get back. It's a mental and physical break like nothing else I've ever experienced.
That's amazing. And it just speaks volumes about you and your strengths. I love hearing stories like that, because then I can look at your strengths and go, yep. Ticking off the boxes there. I love that. What I love about it especially is this whole idea that as adults, so many times we don't take those risks to try something new that's going to make us really uncomfortable, especially those with some pretty significant consequences. But there are many who don't even take the risks that don't have significant consequences, except for not doing them. And I think people forget to look at it from that perspective.
Right.
So, for instance, my brother is learning Spanish. He's been spending a lot of time in Mexico and learning Spanish, taking Spanish lessons, and he is learning to speak fluent Spanish. This is something he took on in his 40s. Mm-hmm. And learning a new language in your 40s, anything over 16 pretty much is going to be hard. And he's doing it. He's working really hard at it. And he's putting himself in some really awkward positions of not being the expert. And he's the oldest of three. So he's the expert in everything.
Yep.
But I am so proud of this aspect of him putting himself in this vulnerable position of not knowing something and having to learn, having to ask for help, and practicing with Spanish-speaking people, putting himself in that kind of uncomfortable circumstance. Many of us would not do that because it's just too uncomfortable. And he's thinking in terms of consequences of not doing it. I would rather put myself in this position, trying something and being uncomfortable and being vulnerable, than the alternative, which is to never learn Spanish and go to Spanish-speaking countries and not be able to communicate, because this is part of his dream for his retirement. So I love that. And I just had this experience when I did some work for a team that was way out of my comfort zone. I've done the kind of work they asked me to do, but this was just not on my radar. And I remember when I finished the second session, it was 2 strategic planning sessions for an agency that I knew nothing about prior.
Right.
And I was so stressed about it because it was so, as my friend Ashley says, so stretchy. I was feeling so uncomfortably stretchy. The kind of stretchy, like eating way too much in tight pants when you're Thanksgiving or whatever, like really uncomfortably stretchy. And when I went in for a massage after the second session, I remember having this release, like my eyes filled with tears, and I don't usually cry. But for some reason, something about this massage had me kind of just releasing. And the masseuse said, well, what's going on? What is all this stress in your shoulders? I told him what I had done. And I said, it was successful. I completed it. I gave them the notes. They were really pleased with the results. And he said, that was really brave. And I remember laying there on the table going, oh, yes, Sue.
Check me out.
Yeah. Right? So and it was big consequences for my business. My reputation, I'm selling me. It's all about my business and what I do. So yeah, it was major consequences if I didn't succeed in that. So I love that you took that on at 40 and knowing that this isn't, and thinking it was going to be easier than it was going to be.
Yeah.
So tell me, when you think about that, stepping out and doing something, because you're like, I'm doing this. I've always wanted to do this. My mom was almost 40 when she went back to school to be a nurse for the same reason. I've always wanted to be a nurse. I was never good at science. She nailed it, graduated summa cum laude with an RN. So what is a time where you had to apply that recently, where you had to say, I'm going to do this again? Obviously, probably not quite such significant circumstances, like learning how to scuba dive.
Right.
But when did you apply this recently?
I think the most recent time, one of the things that I've realized about myself is that this idea of having something at stake, having an element of risk, is actually part of what gets me up in the morning. It's part of where I derive excitement and satisfaction from.
Challenge. Mm-hmm.
Challenge, yeah. And I had an opportunity back in February. I was the final keynote speaker for the U.S. Navy's first summit on diversity, which was a huge honor, right? And right before that, I had had an opportunity to be a panelist among a number of people who were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And one of the things that really struck me was that I was the only white person who was on the panel, and all of the other panelists were young Black women. And then when I was in DC, the Navy's summit was 3 days long. And I was one of 2 white women panelists and one of 4 white human panelists over a 3-day conference. And so it was a lot of people of color, mostly Black women. And one of the things that the women kept talking about was how fearful they are that we're going to get to some point in the future and look back on this current period of time in which we find ourselves right now. And it's going to be just another thing that happened at some point, and nothing systemically is going to change. Mm. And so I got to thinking about well, why? I'm afraid of that too. And what are the conditions that are helping us to feel like that's maybe a likelihood? And then, so what do I do about it? And I ended up deciding that part of what's happening is that, for very good reasons, the conversation around diversity for the last 2 years has largely been a Black and white conversation. And if it stays exclusively that, we are more likely to not make the systemic change that we need. And that there is no organization in the US where practitioners who are doing this work can come together and have some of the hard conversations that need to be had, and workshop new ideas, and collectively come up with new best practices, and share information and learn with and from each other. And so I decided to create it. And it's going to be called the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Professionals Association. And because we can never do anything by ourselves that is big, I am creating an advisory board. And I have a co-founder who is a Black disabled man. And the advisory board is intentionally male and female, straight, gay, lesbian, transgender, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American, white, Black, young, medium, older, like all of the abled and disabled, neurodiverse, all of the different flavors that humans come in. Because my belief is that our opportunity with what's been happening around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is really to get to the inclusion and belonging part. That's the juice at the end of the rainbow. That's what we all need, is to feel included and to feel as though we belong. Back to that, humans are herd animals. And there's hard stuff that we get to grapple with on the road to that. But that's the endpoint, that's the goal. And if we keep the goal in mind, it's easier to get through the hard conversations and the hard work that needs to happen on our journey towards inclusion and belonging. So that's the most
that's stretchy.
Getting outside of my comfort zone. And I am a white woman doing this work who has been told on numerous occasions, you don't belong in this room. And so getting over that, and also creating this collective that represents the panoply of humanity, but realizing, well, if not me, then who? Because nobody's creating it.
So again, two things that immediately came to mind. One is that if we want to make this a sustainable change, not just a conversation, but change, right, internal, external, I mean, everything has to shift away from a discussion about one group or another. It's not about women's rights. It's not about equal rights. It's about inclusion and right, recognizing and valuing and finding beauty in all of those differences.
Right.
And not trying to make somebody equal to another person, because we're not.
Right.
And we can't ever be. And that's where that whole strengths thing comes in again, which is, if I'm not valuing somebody who does things and thinks differently, then I am not bringing my best self, because right, I think I have to do everything or think everything or be everything. It comes back to this whole idea of, as adults, so many times we don't take that time to be stretchy, to try something that's out of our comfort zone, that feels like a risk.
Mm-hmm.
And those conversations and looking in the mirror for our own bias, that's where our growth is going to be.
I have a friend who says nobody ever grew staying at home and being comfortable. And you don't grow when you're sitting in the bar. I mean, you might.
You can learn a lot, but that is not the same. Yeah, you can learn a lot. Like, you can be a couch potato learning a ton of stuff, but if you never apply it, then there's no growth.
Right.
Yeah. And some people are okay with that.
Right.
And that is, I have no judgment for that. There are some people who have been through so much in their lives that they are perfectly happy with comfort, and they're going to stay there.
Yep.
And that's, as long as they are satisfied in that place, and it's not coming out in negative ways in their relationships, or complaining nonstop because they're lonely or poor or not growing
or bored, right?
Once they get there, then we have something to talk about. But if they're content there and they see their lives for what they are and are content there for as long as they can be, no judgment for that.
And as long as they're not throwing stones at those of us who are wanting to be stretchy.
Right. And trying new things. Yes, absolutely. Putting ourselves in that vulnerable position of having those difficult conversations.
Right.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a lot.
It's a lot. And it is what I feel called in my heart to do. The first 17 years of my working career, I was working for social change nonprofit organizations. And for a lot of different reasons, this feels like coming back to that work, just in through a different door. And it's a little woo-woo, but I had my, now I'm not going to call it the wrong thing. There are people who are trained, often Reiki practitioners, who are trained to read a file of you.
Akashic records.
That's it.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I had it done. And what kept coming to the person who was reading my records is that my purpose is inclusion. That is what I'm all about. And as I think about sort of the things that I've done personally and professionally over the course of my life so far, ultimately, that has always been the focus. It's not surprising to me that I got into scuba diving and loved it so much that I wanted to help teach this to other people. I want
so
everybody
they can experience it too.
Right. I want everybody in with me
Because of your experience with the peace and the community,
right,
as a result of that activity.
Yeah. And how it's joyful for me being under the water, and it's so beautiful, and the world is covered in so much water. Like, let's get out there and explore it. It's going to be great. It's going to be fun, and come on along. If that sounds good to you. If it doesn't sound good to you, then great, mazel tov.
I'll take you on a hike on a mountain, and you'll
exactly.
have a similar experience, but way up high where it's very quiet, except you hear the wind coming through the trees. If you can be very quiet and you're not around people or city, and it sounds like a wave coming up the side of the mountain, when you hear the wind coming through the trees, it literally sounds like you're standing on the beach and listening to the waves. It's amazing. And there's something so mindful and peaceful about that.
Yeah.
And it can be just as dangerous if you're in bear country and mountain lions around here. And and I'm tiny. I'm 5'2" and pretty small. So I'm kind of bait for those mountain lions.
Right.
So being aware of your surroundings. And if your brain is going into that internal dialogue about your deadlines and what you shouldn't have said or should have said, or the fight you had with your kid that morning, you are putting yourself at great risk if you're out in the wilderness, even if it's a 20-minute walk from your home. Where I live, that's wilderness. I can walk 20 minutes and be in wilderness with wild animals. So, so I hear you.
Cool.
It is really. I'm so lucky. I am grateful every day for the life that I have. Let's bring this full circle. I think where we've gone with this, especially, is that sense that we need to challenge ourselves in a way that feels, I'm going to call out my friend Ashley, because she's the one that gave me that phrase of feeling stretchy, that when we do this, and it's so uncomfortable, if we have what you said really resonated with me, if we have the ultimate goal in mind, then that stretchiness is something we can work through. If we're doing it just for the sake of stretchiness, we may not follow through. We may not finish. But in my case for doing the strategic planning, the ultimate result was that this very critical community organization, a housing partnership, starts to make some important cultural shifts, or is a guide toward the how they're going to address the next 6 months to 2 years of uncertainty in the housing market for people who can't afford housing. That was my ultimate goal. Like, how do I make sure that they get out of this something that this was a money well spent, because this is money that's not going toward other programs. They're paying me to do this. So that was the goal. When I think about you and your stretchiness of this organization and putting yourself in a position where you are the minority, anyone who has ever done that knows that it is uncomfortable no matter what you're doing, whether you're the only man in a group of women, or the only woman in a group of men, or the only 60-year-old in a group of 20-year-olds, or the only Black person in a group of white people. Whatever that is, we all know that takes a level of vulnerability and strength and courage that not everyone has to be able to call on that. And you're doing this because of your purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that when we get really clear on what the purpose is behind this, what my mission is, then I'm willing. It's worth it to me. I'm willing to feel stretchy. I'm willing to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I'm uncomfortable a lot. And so
it's the place you live.
Right.
Yes.
And leading conversations around diversity, by their very nature, these are uncomfortable conversations. We are looking at times when we have been made to feel less than, or when we've made others feel less than. By their very nature, they're hard conversations. And so, but it's worth it to me, because the end is everybody having the experience of feeling included. Everyone have the experience of knowing that they belong.
And they can contribute.
And that they can contribute and that they matter.
Exactly. Their purpose is just as important as yours in this case, especially in this situation, because once they understand that they have value to add, that they are contributors, active contributors, that's when the magic happens.
Right. Yeah. And it's been an amazing experience just so far in helping to make this manifest. Everyone who I've said, here's what I'm doing, and I would love it if you would be on the advisory board helping me create this. Every single person who I have asked has said yes. And in part, I'm being smart and strategic about who I'm asking. And everyone sees the opportunity. Everyone sees the need. And when we stay focused on the opportunity to be part of creating a world in which everyone can feel included, in which everyone belongs. So we've dealt with the equity, we've dealt with the diversity, we're at the end of the rainbow, and like that's worth it. And people are responding to the call, and it's been very fulfilling and joyful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Janine, this has been such a pleasure. And for our listeners, I will have links to Janine's website and how to get in touch with her via LinkedIn in the show notes associated with this podcast at elkinsconsulting.com. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we go? Maybe what other resources you have out there that people can look at?
So one of the things that I know that you and I both love paying attention to is listening and intentional listening. On my website, jmjcg.com, to which there will be a link in the show notes, there is an assessment that you can take for free about how you listen and what your opportunities might be to grow as a listener. So it's one of the things that I love helping to support people around. And if that sounds intriguing to you, check it out.
Absolutely. I highly recommend any resources to improve our active listening skills. I can tell you that when I started really focusing on that, making it an integrated part of my life and my business, my relationship changed with my boys. And they are almost 21 and 23 now. And thank goodness it changed when they were teenagers instead of waiting until they were adults, because there have been some hard years in between. So yes, highly recommend any resources related to knowing where your blind spots are in terms of listening and knowing what you already do very well. So yeah. Janine, thank you so much for joining me. I so appreciate your time.
It has truly been my honor. Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Thank you.